Moving along to our next briefing item, ordinance number 2015-038, amending the budget expenditures for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2015, in an amount not to exceed $300,000 for the demolition of the Kress building located at 116 West Broad Street. I believe Mr. Orr will be briefing us on this item as well.
Yes, good evening again, Mayor, Council. So I have a presentation, and then also we'll talk about this as well. So to give you a little bit of background, let's start there, and then we'll go through some of the pictures. So in 2009, the city acquired the property located at 116 West Broad Street, also known as the Kress building, from the Bi-State Women's Center, Inc. It was as a donation through ordinance number 073-2009, and I believe I provided that in your packet. The city transferred the property ownership to the Housing Finance Corporation shortly after acquiring the property, and the city is the sole shareholder in that organization. Since that time, the property has deteriorated to the point that it's impacted adjacent property owners, and the building's front sidewalk has been barricaded since November of 2014 due to public safety concerns resulting from falling debris. And I'll show you some of those pictures as well. You can see the barricades on the screen now. In your packet are also letters from nearby property owners, including Jason Horton and Tom Morrissey, which there's flooding issues with no roof on the structure currently into adjacent properties. There's also the risk that the building walls may collapse. It is a four-story building, and so it can easily tumble one way or the other on adjacent properties, which are typically 1 to 2 stories located around it. A structural engineering report conducted by Raleigh and Associates out of Shreveport, Louisiana, stated that the building structure appears to be unstable and needs to be demolished as soon as possible. This report was completed in 2012. Staff has researched various demolition funding options and has exhausted all current grant sources. One of the funding options that we looked at that was originally, I believe, on the table for staff at the time was EPA grants that we received, both assessment grants and then also to the revolving loan fund grant. And due to the EPA's process for acquiring property and conducting a phase 1 assessment prior to, that eliminated us from using those funds for this project. So again, furthermore, the EPA determined that the city cannot use existing assessment or revolving loan funds for the project. Staff has acquired 3 estimates for budget purposes that show costs not to exceed $300,000 for the demolition of the Kress building. If approved, staff will proceed with an RFP for bids for the demolition project. At this time, I'd like to just quickly go through some of these pictures that were taken last week. We have a number of pictures, I believe that's in your packet as well. They've been taken over the past 5 years, but we have some updated pictures. It's just a shot of the interior of the building. It's important to note that you can walk about 3 steps into the building until it drops into a flooded basement. And so that's part of the issue, is that you cannot actually assess the building or where it's at, because although those pictures you can still see some flooring, there's about a 10-foot gap till you get to that section. So we've had structural engineers again look at the building, but they're unable to assess it because it's as far as you can go. This is some pictures looking up former roof. Here's the basement and those steps I was referring to. You can see the water in the basement below. Here's the front sidewalk, and part of the sidewalk has been repaired. This was part of the STEP grant that was just finished downtown, and so we have nice brand new sidewalks that we currently cannot have pedestrian traffic on due to this danger. You can see in the picture, sort of to the middle of the building, there has been falling debris, and I'll show you the next picture, which some facade fell actually off the building through the hole, or created a hole rather, in the canopy and landed on the sidewalk. And so that's was part of our initial concern in November. We were alerted to that by adjacent property owner. So in front of the Kress building. We do think that at least the initial debris that's falling from the building is from the actual mortar over the words Kress, and so that was placed some time ago, and that appears to be what's falling at this point. But we've also had some structural engineers again come out and say, well, there's other issues. Even if you were to fix that issue, you're still just running a risk over time that there's numerous other failures that have been noted on the exterior walls of the building. So, be glad to answer any questions that you have.
I have one. How did the city gain possession of this particular building?
Again, in your packet, you have information pertaining to the staff at the time and the recommendation to move forward with acquiring this property. I can say I think the thought process at the time was that to use EPA funds. However, that process was not followed in terms of being able to use those EPA funds in the correct manner that was needed. So I really can't, I wasn't necessarily a part of those discussions. I can't speak to it any more than what I believe would be the thought process at the time, but the EPA process was not followed in order to use EPA funds.
And so because that process wasn't followed, then any other type of grant funding mechanism, we can't utilize that. So now we have to use our own money in order to demo this property.
That's correct. I think that's one of the reasons why the city has held ownership for 6 years, is that both former staff and current staff have looked at different funding options. I think we've had a little bit of flexibility in that, in terms of not much has happened. There's not been an urgent need to tear down the building, but again, as I stated, starting fall of last year in November, I think we've seen an urgent need for quite some time, but something needs to be done, and we can no longer ignore the issue.
I'm still not understanding why the city, what was the purpose of the city?
Again, I was not here at the time. I can't answer
the building
that.
in the first place. I'm not seeing where it would have benefit the city in any kind of way to buy the building in that particular shape, and then have to go spend $300,000 to tear it down, and we have citizens that we're not even through with our project on tearing down these houses in the neighborhood. We're still working on that, and if we got $300,000,
yes, sir,
that we can tear down more houses and repair your sidewalk, and the outside of the building wasn't that bad. I mean, is that the only building downtown that's in that particular shape?
if I may, Mayor, Councilman. And I can agree with Councilmember Castillo. This seems obnoxious, at the very least, that we have to do this. The property was previously owned by a nonprofit organization, and they looked for someone to take it off their hands, and the city did that. I think probably city staff had a plan at the time, 6 years ago, to seek grant funding to make it happen, but didn't think it all the way through. And so now we're held with a bag. We've got a bag of problems that we have to solve. And the solution, unfortunately, does not include any eligibility for grants. We missed some very simple steps in acquiring the property. We should have never taken ownership of the property without first conducting a phase 1 environmental analysis of the property. which is standard for every property acquisition where it's a gift or a purchase or anything else. We do a phase one. That's a minimum effort to acquire property for public purpose. There was no public purpose defined for this property at the time, except to maybe restore it or demolish it. And restoring it would have been horrendous cost as well, and then for what purpose? So, and what I have found in my 2 years here so far, I've had a number of property owners come to me from time to time as city manager and ask me if the city would be interested in buying their building. And I'd say, why would I need to buy your building? They said, well, can't you find a use for it? And I said, well, no, of course not. There's no public purpose for us buying your building. Just because you have a building you want to offload onto somebody, the city is not the recipient of such charity because it's never free. There's always a cost. And I think the city has earned a reputation over time to be the rescuer of many poor business decisions or poor property maintenance practices or whatever they may be. And it's become a huge problem. And this building is just one example of that. But we got to bite it off one chunk at a time. You know, what we have in our possession now, we must take care of. We can't turn our back on it, so we have to do something with it. This particular property is certainly a public safety hazard to anybody downtown near that property, and the two neighboring properties' buildings are certainly in danger. If our building collapses for any reason, we're probably going to bring down two more walls with it that attach to it to the neighboring property owners. And then we'll have pretty significant lawsuits on our hands. So we've got to remove this building. It's just going to have to be done. Now, given all the things in the past that's got us to this point is really not important to us today, except as a lesson to learn from. And I've instructed this staff since I've been here, we don't take anything from anybody. We explore everything just like we should for every property acquisition, whatever it is. There is no gift. You know, it's always the old saying, the gift that keeps giving. Well, this is one that's kept giving, and now we're going to bring it to an end. It is going to cost $300,000 approximately to make it come to an end. And we'll still have a property. We'll still have a lot. Now, we have received some interest of people acquiring the lot from us after we restore it to developable property, and there's an interest in some downtown parking on that lot or a neighboring building buying it to build a private parking lot. Any number of things could happen, but that's after we restore it and get it back to a position that we could surplus the property, put it on the market, or find a public use for it, whatever it might be. But we have to get there, and we just don't have a choice on this one. And I agree. I'd rather spend $300,000 on tearing down houses all over the city, just like we're doing. I'd rather be able to do that. But at least those houses aren't about to fall on somebody walking down a sidewalk. You know, they are a hazard in themselves, but they're not quite the hazard that this building is. This building is a very significant hazard in a built-up area that it must be taken down. And I will assure you that this staff will never get us into this position again on an acquisition of a property. You know, we will make sure the public process is followed and very distinctly. And if we acquire a property, all the due diligence will be done well in advance before we ever take acquisition of any property in the future. So we're here solving somebody's past mistake. That's unimportant who did it, but we are here to fix it, and we're going to need the appropriation to do that, and you're okay to do this demolition. And we've spoken to our insurance agencies, TML, who's our insurance provider. We've making sure that we are covered on this property right now. So if somebody does get hurt tomorrow, we are covered. And but they are saying this is a high-risk building and we need to demolish it. And that's our insurance people talking to us, that we need to get rid of this building.
Have you figured out where this $300,000 is going to come from?
Well, this appropriation is strictly from the fund balance, from the savings. And that's where it's going to come from. And it'll reduce the fund balance. Now, our fund balance is pretty good shape. And I think the fund balance going forward is going to be in pretty good shape. So, you know, we haven't done our revenue projections for next year yet, but we'll be doing that as we kick into the budget season. And if revenue's down and we've brought fund balance down, then we'll have to look at the total budget picture at that time, and we may have to take some cuts somewhere else in order to meet this. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think our revenue projections will be healthy enough that we won't realize this $300,000 being taken from the fund balance, because we have several millions of dollars in the fund balance. So we're in pretty good shape on the fund balance.
questions? Mr. Castile?
I know all this was done before you got here and before I got here,
Sure.
but the buying of that building downtown was approved through the city council? We approved that?
It was approved by the city council to take ownership of the building. It was given. It was donated to the city. Another nonprofit actually had ownership before, and they donated it to the city. The city staff recommended it apparently, and the city council approved it. But I think that recommendation, their thought process was they were going to be able to use EPA grants to tear the building down. But whoever did that did not make sure we followed the due diligence before we took ownership. And then by not following the due diligence and skipping those steps, now disqualifies us from using EPA grant money to do the demolition.
Mr. Whitson, to refresh my memory, we actually adopted a property procurement program of several months ago. And I would imagine that it actually covers the steps that we need to take whenever we are gifted property.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll tell, and like I said before, I've had people approach me since I've been here wanting me to take their property or purchase their property. And first off, I look for a public purpose. Is there a public purpose first if they want us to buy property? And I'd say there's no public purpose. There's no reason for me to buy your building. And number two, if we were to recommend it, we would do our due diligence first to ensure there's a good title search, the phase one environmental evaluation is completed. All those steps would have to be done first, and that is in that policy that you adopted a few months back, that we would follow those procedures and very distinctly follow those procedures.
Okay. Whenever you were expressing what things you would look for in a property being gifted, I remember you mentioning some of those same things whenever we were looking at that same policy.
Yes, sir. I've been in this boat too many times. I know how to acquire property for the public. I know how to say no to certain things. And, you know, like I said, a gift is not always a gift. It's usually to somebody's advantage that they're wanting to give us something, and it's not always to our advantage to accept it. And we're not the bailout organization for everybody else.
Okay.
Just two notes moving forward.
All right.
One, this ordinance is just to amend the budget, and moving forward, we would issue an RFP. We'd bring that RFP, the bid rather, back to you for approval. The second thing is that our legal staff is currently researching whether or not the Housing Finance Corporation, within their duties, can demolish this property. And if not, we would bring back a resolution or ordinance to transfer it back to the city. Either way, the city still has sole ownership of the building, whether it's with the Housing Finance Corporation or with the city. So those two ordinances or resolutions are still yet to be done.
Okay. Any final comments or questions?
Mr. Orr, with the RFP, there's a possibility that it could be marginally under $300,000.
That's correct. We're looking at this as a worst-case scenario, and so this also factors in some engineering costs, any abatement that's needed in terms of asbestos or lead-based paint or other things that are needed in order to tear down the building. So this is a worst-case scenario, we hope, of $300,000 based on just some estimates that we've received preliminary to the project.
So those pictures that you showed on the video there, so the building inside is already demolished.
That's correct.
So the only thing that has to be demolished is the front of the building?
A lot more than that.
Yeah.
The basement is caved in and has a lot of debris in it and water in it. So in the demolition process, we'll have to pump the basement out. The water might have to be tested because we can't pump that water out into the sewer system unless we know it's clean. So if there's asbestos or any other contaminants in the water, we can't put it there. So we might have to haul the water away as one process to get it somewhere to be treated so it can be disposed of. And then once we get the water out, and then we start getting the debris out of the basement, and heaven forbid something doesn't fall and kill somebody while they're trying to do all that, or seriously injure them, Then we're going to have to assess the property, determine if there is hazardous material there that has to be abated before we can start demolishing and hauling it away. And then we got to make sure that we're securing the two neighboring buildings, that as we demolish our building, we don't cause their neighboring walls to collapse. So we may have to fill in some of the basement at some point before we start demolition, so we have a base to work from. So it'll be up to the contractor to propose how he's going to demolish it, not only demolish it, but how he's going to go about it to ensure the security of the two neighboring buildings. And so there's a lot of thought about what needs to be done to do that.
So you've already got estimates on this?
No, we don't. We've had estimates from experts, but not from contractors yet. So that would be the process. We'll go out with a request for proposals, and the contractors will come back with their proposals and what it would cost to do the work. And that'll be brought back to you to award at some point to the low bidder. But this would appropriate the money, so we'd have the authority to actually spend money on, because some of this money would be used to do assessments and that sort of thing, not just the demolition.
So I guess an even worse case scenario, if it's in excess of 300,000.
We'd have to get another amendment at that point. So right now we're confident that the 300,000 will do the job, but surely we'll get through the assessment part and get the bids in at some point and be able to know better exactly where we're going.
Any other comments? All right. Thank you, Mr. Orr. Once again, we'll have a public hearing at the next council meeting on the 27th on this item. Moving along.